When I think of performance, the first thing that definitely doesn't come into my mind is laptops, especially Apple laptops that are supposedly under-spec'd and underpowered. So it was with rather bated breath that I picked up a $3,500 MacBook Pro to become my main video editing machine. First off, let's talk specs. My MacBook is one of the pre-made configurations from Apple with a 2.7 GHz i7 processor, 16 GB of RAM, a 512 GB storage SSD, and a Radeon 455 GPU. When it comes to editing 4K content, your hardware choice is incredibly important, and I was almost unconvinced that I wouldn't be able to happily edit 4K footage without maxing out the machine. So, how did it fare? Well, when I first opened up Final Cut, I was quite taken aback by the seemingly minimal interface. There just wasn't a lot there, but it was fairly obvious what to do. I already had a 50 GB project loaded up, so I imported the footage and was pretty convinced that nothing had been imported. On my Windows machine, it would take at least 30 seconds to a few minutes to import all of the footage, but with Final Cut, it was almost instantaneous. I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. You also get the option of creating optimized media and proxy files. Yuryev, who does absolutely fantastic Mac-related videos, by the way, check out his channel in the description below. I checked with him on whether or not I should create optimized or proxy files, and he said he doesn't. He just drops straight raw 4K content into the timeline and has no problem editing it at all. So I dragged all the footage I could into the timeline, about 40 minutes of A-roll footage and 25 minutes of B-roll. And when doing your research on Final Cut Pro and how it performs on Macs, you'll likely hear, the likes of Jonathan Morrison, Austin Ekins, or Max Yuryev describing the scrubbing experience as being butter smooth. They were absolutely 100% correct. Scrubbing through footage on the timeline, even with around an hour of 4K footage on there, was absolutely butter smooth. I mean, moving the playhead around, I could see absolutely everything that was going on. It makes finding key points within footage extremely easy and pain-free to see. On my desktop system, this is not the case at all. Granted, the read-write speeds of the SSD are much lower. I have Premiere Pro, the project file, and the footage all located on separate SSDs. The MacBook Pro is all operating off the single SSD, and that I think is pretty impressive. I did try another project with optimized media and proxy files, but I found that it took absolutely forever to transcode the footage with background rendering. Of the files that did actually transcode though, the performance gains when manipulating footage was extremely evident. If you can find a way to transcode the footage prior to the edit and get Final Cut to recognize that properly on import, I definitely recommend it, as it does make a difference, but I'm just not sure whether or not the time payoff is worth it at the moment, given that it's processing mid-edit. Doing the rough edit was definitely an enjoyable experience for me. Using the touch bar to trim clips to the playhead was super easy and honestly just kind of fun. It was a little frustrating not realizing that you actually had to firmly press down on the trackpad to trim a clip and move it around, but apart from that, the learning curve for Final Cut was pretty low, and definitely a lot lower than it was for Premiere Pro. So for those of you just getting into video editing, I would definitely recommend Final Cut Pro. It just seems to have a bit of a lower learning curve. Now, typically when you edit, you have separate workspaces. You have an editing, effects, and color workspace, and it was a little tricky to find the effects panel, but once you're there, adding in effects is an absolute breeze. Final Cut also offers some really cool default titles, which you've seen below. It also helps learning the shortcuts, which is just Control-Shift-0, 1, and 2 to swap between the respective workspaces. One area I did find kind of tricky was the color correction. I was using the color correction tool and I really just don't have the hang of it just yet. I've been told that color correction is pretty easy and really intuitive once you get the plugins and stuff like that sorted. For the moment, I'll just have to make do with watching a few tutorials and getting my head around which plugins are best. Color correcting on the MacBook Pro, by the way, is just incredible. The MacBook Pro screen is hands down absolutely stunning, and I actually prefer using it for color correcting over my 34-inch IPS monitor currently sitting on my desktop. So after all the footage has been edited and color corrected, it's time to do the final render. And the rendering times on Final Cut with this MacBook Pro, they're just insane. To test the render times, I used the project from one of my software development videos and just threw some extra B-roll on top to flesh it out a bit more. And as you can see, Final Cut rendered this 9-minute 4K project out in just 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
Come on! It's the motherfucking Nico Double G Nuka!
Rendering a similar sized project in Premiere Pro would easily take around 15 to 20 minutes, and because I'm careless and sometimes have to render 3 or 4 times, I notice small mistakes and it easily adds an extra hour or so to the editing process. So to wrap up, what is it like editing on the mid-tier 15-inch MacBook Pro? In a word, awesome. It really is. I'm super impressed with Final Cut Pro and how it performs, especially given that it's a laptop. It's super smooth, very intuitive, and an altogether very seamless experience, especially when you compare it to my high-end desktop machine. And that's the thing I'm most stunned about. This laptop gives me a better editing experience than my fully fledged 6-core gaming computer. Now, this is one of the first projects I've edited with Final Cut, and I'm still getting used to all the interface and learning all the tips and tricks and shortcuts and that kind of thing. But with the limited time I've had with it, it's pretty amazing. It makes the video editing process a lot cleaner and easier for me, and for someone who does YouTube as a hobby, it really makes a world of difference, especially compared to the problems I've been having with Premiere Pro. Premiere has been acting up on me recently. Until I had 32 gigabytes of RAM in there, I was constantly getting low memory error warnings, and to this day, I'm consistently getting crashes like the viewport crashing. I have to restart the program, I'd potentially lose some files and stuff like that. So just really all sorts of problems. With Final Cut, it all just does seem to work, and really well too. Also, because this is a laptop as opposed to a desktop, it means that I can edit on the couch, in bed, or down the road at the coffee shop, wherever I want to. The freedom of having a fully fledged editing machine that I can take wherever I want to is absolutely amazing. A lot of working professionals will really appreciate having that power on the road as well. With all that good though, I'm still not 100% sure whether or not I'm going to keep the MacBook Pro. It cost me a ton of money, $3,700 to be precise, and I already have a desktop that runs Premiere, and Premiere Pro works most of the time. I don't know. Anyway, this has been my first impressions of editing with Final Cut Pro on the MacBook Pro. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.